From Unity Church of Christianity in Houston, Texas, this is The Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational Christian church providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress with the Reverend Howard Caesar.
So it is Easter, and it's a great time. I love the fact that Easter is and happens in the spring when there's such a resurrection, such a resurgence of life in nature. It's going on all around us. It's undeniable. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. The birds have migrated back. There's all this chirping and singing going on around us. I have those 3 birdhouses I like to tell about that I have purple martins in several levels, and I have like 40 or 50 of these purple martins that have migrated back, and they're chirping and singing. There's no way that you can be down around my yard, I promise. It's an up yard. And then I like to get out in the yard, and some of you are green thumbs. Some of you actually have green hands. You're very good in gardening. And anyway, the plant life, and just to see the resurrection of all the flowers and the plants and the trees and all of that happening is a powerful thing for me too. I do my part in the yard. I plant some flowers and prepare some of the beds and throw a little water and fertilize in there. And then basically I step back and say, "Grow, baby, grow." And I get to just watch the beauty of it come out. Bloom and grow where you're planted is what I say to all those flowers and things. And kind of that's the way it is, I think, for us. When you think about it, I think God planted us here in this earth and then said to us, "Grow, baby, grow. Bloom where you're planted. And I'll have help, and I'll send help." And he sent help in the way of Jesus Christ, our elder brother, way shower, great example, and showed us that there was a way to create spring in our lives. There was a way to have resurrection or the resurgence of life. It's all around us, but he showed us the principles and the way as well, and how it is that we can make our way out of the winters of our life and on into the spring. Martin Luther is quoted as saying, "Our Lord has written the promise of resurrection not in books alone, but in every leaf of springtime." I love that. It's been written, resurrection, into every leaf of springtime. Everything that's bursting out, everything is alive. All around us, things are pushing out toward the light, and we are to be about that as well. That's what really resurrection is. It's been over 2,000 years, and yet the whole Christian world is moved each year at this time to celebrate this event, which is of huge magnitude. We call it resurrection, and it's basically that which is about moving beyond the circumstances, what may have appeared to be very, very dire, bitter defeat, and the whole story and drama taking a twist and being turned into victory and overcoming. It's a powerful story. It starts out, of course, with the drama. It's pretty dim, didn't look good. Jesus was spat on, he was taunted, he was degraded, given a crown of thorns, taken to the hill of Golgotha, nailed on the cross, and he was put there to die. And after Jesus was crucified under Roman authority, his body was taken down from the cross and to be buried. And it was the custom at that time to have the body wrapped, and commentaries say that to be wrapped in approximately 100 pounds of preserving burial ointment, that this was common in that time. And he was placed in a tomb, and there was a big heavy stone, and some commentaries, Bible commentaries, talk about even the weight of that stone, how big it was, and the measurables and things. A Roman guard consisting of 12 soldiers, 12 men, was stationed outside the door, the front of that tomb. And the soldiers were given strict orders that no one was to come near that tomb. And should they leave their post, they would be punished with death. And so there was a lot of provision for really maintaining that tomb. And yet somehow, 3 days later, the tomb of Christ was empty, and the stone had been rolled away. And the followers of Jesus claimed that, of course, he had been risen from the dead. Now, there was no motive or way for anyone to have stolen the body. They would have had to have overpowered 12 Roman soldiers who were in shouting distance of the entire Roman garrison. And the disciples, they were scattered all around the city in fear, hiding. And the three women in Jesus' life in no way could have taken on those soldiers at the front of the tomb, nor could they have moved that stone from the front. And yet, Christ was resurrected. He was resurrected by the power of God. The power of God. That's it. God was at work in him and in his life. And it was a tremendous comeback. And it basically comes down to he did what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to do it, and he did it in a very powerful way. And he did it against all odds, you know. And it's what grabs your heart. When there is someone who is wanting to show the way, they tell you what they're going to do, and they do it. And it touches you, and it empowers you. And then when they do it to the glory of God, again, it adds a dimension of power to it. You know, there's a story that doesn't equate certainly to this, but it's the story of Babe. You know who I'm talking about, baseball fans, Babe Ruth. And there's that story that is kind of a legend where he went to the hospital, he visited a young boy, and the young boy, I can't remember what his disability or illness was there in the hospital, but he told the boy that he, at his next game, was going to hit a home run for him. And so, you know, as the story goes and the legend goes on, he, in that game, in one of the times at bat, he stepped out of the batter's box and he pointed to where he was going to hit the ball. He stepped back into the batter's box and hit the ball, a home run, where he said it was going to go. He did what he said he was going to do. He told that boy that he was going to deliver, and he did what he said he was going to do. And I believe there was something that was working within Babe Ruth that day that allowed him to open his heart, move with compassion, and deliver, and that he drew upon that. It is possible for all of us to draw on something higher that elevates our game in this life that we've been given. When we come from the right place, we are given the assistance and the help to elevate our game. Now, Jesus had tried to tell the disciples what was going to happen to him, that he was going to suffer and die, and on the third day he would be raised from the dead. And they really never grasped what it was that he was talking about. They thought he was going to come marching in and establish his kingdom, and it was all about an outer thing, and many of them didn't comprehend what he was talking about. And so now that he had been crucified, they had scattered around like sheep without a shepherd. And they had their hearts broken, their dreams shattered, because all that they had projected onto Jesus that he was going to do looked like it had just all fallen apart there. And they began to think about going back to their previous occupations, you know, to the tax tables or to getting the fish nets and these different things. But all that changed 3 days later when he appeared. And basically, the bottom line, he did what he said he was going to do, you know. Maybe they didn't understand what he was going to do, but he delivered. And one of the obvious messages of Easter really is that death is not something that we are to be afraid of, that essentially Jesus really went through all of his ministry and delivered on all of the fears that humanity could possibly have and took us beyond them and overcame them. He basically showed us that death is not the final thing that it appears to be, and that life continues on, and that the Spirit of God that dwells within us cannot be snuffed out, that we're more than a physical body, we're more than form itself, that there is a dimension of us, the spiritual body, that is housed within the physical body. And we lay that down, that the Spirit of God is resilient. It can never, ever die. And so Jesus was a great teacher. He is a wonderful vessel through which God poured this truth and was able to demonstrate enormous overcoming power in anything that he came to face. And he was able to demonstrate the truth of God that sets us free from all of our fears, and to do so with the activity of love. He brought love on into this world in a way that it hadn't been before, that it is about life and it's not about death, and that the life and the Spirit of God is bigger and greater than any kind of circumstance that a person can come up against. And most important of all, I think we all miss a powerful message that Easter has for us if we fail to realize that the principle of resurrection, the principle itself, was not exclusive to Jesus. You know, Jesus taught that we should share in this resurrection principle and idea. And he said, "I am the resurrection and the life, and he that believeth on me, though he die, yet shall he live. He said, because I live, you shall live also. And he said, he that believes on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. And so, powerful teachings, powerful idea, and he was essentially saying that this resurrection is something that each of us is to incorporate into all of our lives, that we must, essentially, because we're going to come up against things, and you know very well, you have done so already probably, as I have. At the very least, we're talking about a principle. It's a resurrection principle that says if you turn to God, if you embrace this presence and power that is beyond you standing alone as a separate self, that you are drawing upon a power that can resurrect you and move you beyond the mountains that you may face, whatever the difficulties. In fact, some of the challenges we face are there for no other reason than to bring us back to bonding with the source that moves us through all challenges in life. You can rise up out of any kind of difficulty. It can be a financial challenge, it can be a health challenge, it can be a relationship challenge, it can be a substance abuse challenge, it can be anything, physical, mental, emotional, anything is there because God is able to take us through anything and everything and be victorious. And so Easter is really about a message of making the comeback sometimes, you know? We have to make a comeback in our lives. Maybe we've fallen low. Maybe we've kind of really felt empty, alone, defeated in some way. We can transform our lives through this power and the activity of the Spirit. That the message of Easter is much like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, as we said earlier, emerging from this dark cocoon and becoming triumphant as a winged creature, a beautiful butterfly. That's who we are. We all go through dark times. Maybe you're not going through a dark time now. Maybe you can think back to when you have. But will the dark win, or will you move toward the light and turn to it? We can always make a comeback to a fuller life, a richer life, a more expansive life, to greater happiness. We can come to where we make more of a contribution to this world. We've been planted in this world to bloom where we grow, to make a difference, to offer something to those who come around and smell our fragrance and see the shine of the rose or the flower that we are in this world. It's what we're called to be. It's been said that Easter is not a passport to another world. It is a quality of perception for this one. It's very important that you get that. It's a very powerful quote. It is that Easter is not a passport to another world. It is a quality of perception for this one. There's a quality of perception that we want to be birthing, to want to have rise up within us that will help us see ourselves forward. There's a true story that has always been meaningful to me that I like to share. It begins with a Dr. Frank Mayfield, who some years back was touring Tewksbury Institute. And on his way out of this institute, he accidentally bumped into the elderly floor maid. And it was an awkward moment, had a little conversation, said, you know, how long have you worked here? And she said, well, I've worked here almost since the place, you know, opened. And he asked, well, can you tell me a little bit about the history of this institute? And she said, I can't tell you a lot, but I can show you something you'd probably like to see. She took him down into the basement, into the oldest part or section of this building, and she pointed to one of what looked like a small prison cell that was already rusting up, the iron bars around it. And she said, that's the cage where they used to keep Annie. And Mr. Mayfield asked, who's Annie? And she answered, well, Annie was this young girl that they brought here because she was incorrigible, which means nobody could do anything to help her. She would bite and scream and throw her food at people. And the doctors and nurses couldn't do anything to help her because she was always spitting and scratching them. And so I was only, she said, a few years younger than her, myself. And I used to think how horrible it would be to be locked up in that cage. And I wanted to help her, but I didn't know what I could do if the nurses and the doctors couldn't do anything even to get near her. And so what I did do one time is I went home and I baked some brownies. And next day I brought them, and I very carefully approached the cage and said, Annie, I baked these brownies just for you. I'll put them right here on the floor, and you can get them if you want. And she left quickly because she was afraid that Annie might grab them and throw them at her, but she didn't. She actually ate them. And she said after that she was nicer to me, this lady said. And sometimes I'd talk to her And I even got her laughing one time. And there was a nurse that happened to notice that she was sort of opening up to me. And so she asked me if I would be willing to help. And so after a while, they asked me if I would go into the cage first. And so, and so I did. And so I would explain to her gently, and I would calm her down, and I would hold her hand. And that's how they got close enough, the doctors and nurses, to discover that Annie was almost blind. And after they had been working with her then and me, getting them close for about a year, the Perkins Institute for the Blind opened its doors around then, and they were able to help her eyesight. And from there, she just continued to unfold and went on to study and to become a teacher. And after she returned back to our institute one day and wanted to be of some help and said to the director, is there something I can do? And the director said, I've just received a letter from a man that he has written about his daughter, and that his daughter is totally unruly, almost like an animal. He told how this daughter was blind and deaf and was deranged, as if deranged. And he said he was at wit's end, and he didn't want to have to put her in an asylum. And so he had written the institute to ask if there was someone, a teacher, that would come to his house and work with his daughter. Isn't it amazing? That's how Annie Sullivan became the lifelong companion of Helen Keller. Annie Sullivan had gone through much the same kind of an experience that Helen Keller had gone through. She knew what it was like. She knew the darkness of that whole experience. And she was able to come and help Helen. How is it that they were put together in this world, those two people? It's only God that can do that. It's only God that can help two people on a comeback that has come from such a pathetic, dark, dreary place. It's the hand of God, really. Now, when Helen Keller received the Nobel Prize, she was asked who it was that had the greatest impact on her life. And she said, Annie Sullivan. But Annie Sullivan was there, and she said, no, Helen, the woman who had the greatest influence on both of our lives was that floor maid at the Tewksbury Institute. It started there. Powerful comeback story, a resurrection story. Resurrection happens in our lives. Any one of us could be one of those three main characters, really. We could be the floor maid that just started out not knowing what to do, but out of compassion, just brought brownies, and where that led is amazing. We could be Annie Sullivan, who was the recipient of those brownies and who went on with her life and then wanted to come and give back to somebody who maybe was in a dark place like she had been. Very powerful, and help resurrect their life. We could be Helen Keller, who, finding ourselves in a dark place also, by the grace of God, draws somebody to us that is there to help us. And we become an inspiration to the world. Helen Keller, if you read about her life and read about the things that she said and her relationship that developed with God in that dark, quiet place of being deaf and blind, it's very powerful. And so, in every case, the floor maid, Annie Sullivan, Helen Keller, all three bloomed where they were planted. Doesn't matter what the condition or the circumstances were, they bloomed, and they played a role in demonstrating a sense of resurrection, the resurrection principle. All three really received the gift of the grace of God, because nothing could have happened in their life without the movement of that grace, those unique experiences that bring people together. Now, we've all known dark moments of seeming loss and defeat, and we know that darkness is only the absence of light. You can bring light into the darkness, but you can't bring darkness into the light. And the Christ is in you as a light. It lives in you. It is a gift. And that light is meant to shine. And that's why Jesus said that along with him, we were a light in the world, and we were supposed to be that. We are to use that gift that Jesus worked so hard to give and to uncover and to peel away the bushel, the this, the that, for you to see the reality of who you are. There's another story I'd like to share with you that is about a professor of religion named Dr. Christensen. And he's a studious man, and he taught at a small college in the western United States. And he was required at this small college to teach a course to all the freshmen, no matter what it was that their major, and it was a course in Christianity. And the professor was very sincere in wanting to communicate the message of the Gospels, but most of the students considered it just a required drudgery. And they didn't take too seriously this course in Christianity. And so one particular year, this professor had a special student named Steve. And Steve was also just a freshman, but he was popular. He was well-liked. He was a physical athlete. He played on the football team. And he also happened to be the best student in the class. And one day, the professor asked Steve to stay after class so he could talk to him. And he asked Steve, "How many push-ups can you do, Steve?" And Steve said, "I can do 200. I try to do them every night." And the professor said, 200, eh? That's pretty good. Could you do 300? He said, "Well, I don't know. I can try." The professor said, "Well, can you do 300 in sets of 10? Because I have a class project, and I need you to do about 300 push-ups in sets of 10. Can you do this?" He said, "I'll try. I need you to come Friday." He told him more of the detail. It was like he was going to throw a party, but he wanted a unique process to happen. So Friday came, and Steve was there in the front at his desk in the front of the class, and they started. And the professor pulled out a big box of donuts, and probably Krispy Kreme. I don't know. It was really... there he had creamy centers, and there were swirls of frosting. Good stuff, you know. Everyone was quite excited that day at class. It was a Friday. It was the last class of the day. It was the last day of the week, and so it was an early start to the weekend, and it was going to be started with what had been promised to be a sort of a party by the professor. And so the professor went to the first girl in the first row and asked, "Cynthia, do you want to have one of these donuts?" And Cynthia says, "Yeah." And so he then turned to Steve, and he asked, "Steve, would you do 10 push-ups so that Cynthia can have a donut?" So he gets down, does 10 push-ups, gets back in his chair. Professor gives a donut to Cynthia. Then he goes to Joe and asks, "Joe, do you want a donut?" Joe says, "Yeah." And Professor asks, "Steve, would you get down and do 10 push-ups so Joe can have a donut?" And so Joe got a donut. And so it went on down the aisle. And there were 4 aisles of students, really. And Steve did 10 push-ups for every person who was offered to get a donut. And waiting down in the second aisle, walking down the aisle, actually, the professor came to a guy named Scott. He was on the basketball team, and he was a popular guy with the girls and stuff. And Scott, he says, "Do you want a donut?" The professor asks. And he says, "Well, can I do my own push-ups?" And the professor says, No, Steve has to do them." And Scott said, "Well, I don't want one then." And the professor shrugged, and he turned to Steve, and he said, "Steve, would you do 10 push-ups so Scott can have a donut that he doesn't want?" He starts to do the push-ups, and Scott says, "Hey, I said I didn't want one." The professor says, "Look, this is my classroom. This is my class. These are my desks. These are my donuts. Just leave it on the desk if you don't want it." And he put a donut on Scott's desk. Well, by now, Steve was beginning to slow down, as athletic as he was. He was turning red, he was panting a bit, he had perspiration on his brow. The professor started down the third row, and the students were getting a little angry now at what was happening here. And the professor asked Jenny, "Jenny, do you want to have a donut?" And she sternly said, "No." The professor says, "Steve, would you please do 10 more push-ups so Jenny can have a donut that she doesn't want?" Did 10. By now, there was an uneasiness really in the whole classroom. And students were saying no again and again to the donuts, and there were a lot of uneaten donuts on the desks. And so Steve was now in a pool of sweat on the floor beneath. And by now there were some other students that wandered in, and they had heard there was a party. And the professor worried, "Oh no, there's 4 more, that's 40 more push-ups, can Steve do this?" Anyway, he kept going on to the next person, Steve struggling the whole time. And then a transfer student actually didn't know much. He had just been there, and he came to the door of the class, and the students saw him, and they all said, "No, don't come in, please leave." He didn't want Steve to go through anymore. Steve looks up and he says, "No, let him come in." Finally, the professor finished the 4th row and started on the visitors that had come in. Steve's arms are shaking and trembling. He's sweating profusely. He's breathing heavily. He is grunting. He's in a bit of agony. At this point, there's not a dry eye in the room. The professor turned to the last person, Susan, and said, "Susan, do you want a donut?" And Susan, tears running down her face, she begins to cry, and she says, "Professor, why can't I help him?" And now the professor, with tears in his eyes himself, said, "No, Steve has to do it alone. I've given him this task, and he is in charge of seeing that everyone has the opportunity for a donut, whether they want it or not." When I decided to have this party to this last day of class, I looked at my grade book. Steve is the only one that has a perfect grade. Everyone else has skipped classes or turned in some inferior work. We made a deal before this class. He agreed, we talked, that he'd do 10 push-ups so that everyone could get the gift of a donut. And after Steve had done his 350 push-ups and lay exhausted on the floor, the professor turned to the class and he said, "And so it was with our great example and way-shower, Jesus Christ. He came with the understanding that he would do everything that was required of him so that we might have the gift of an amazing life, a life that was free of fears, a life that delivered to us a resurrection principle, a life that was of love, not fear." Know that you have been given the gift and that you're able to call on that presence and that resurrecting spirit in you at any moment and any time. That you can elevate your game, that you can rise up to higher states of conscious awareness and living, and you can consecrate your life and make of it a really holy and sacred experience. And so I ask all of you, do you want a donut? Whether you want it or not, it's like there's a donut there every morning when you get up. You can either take it or leave it, but it's a gift. And somebody went through a lot for you to have it. Remember, Easter is not a passport to another world. It is a quality of perception for this one. God bless you all.
The awe-inspiring medium, James Van Praagh, bridges the gap between two planes of existence, that of the living and that of the dead, by providing evidential proof of life after death via detailed messages. His very natural, easygoing style would lead you to believe that he's chatting with a friend on the telephone. Don't miss James Van Praagh as he presents An Evening of Spirit, Thursday, April 11, 7:30 p.m. at Unity Houston. A book signing will follow in the sanctuary. For tickets, call 713-782-4050 or purchase them online at unityhouston.org.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. At Unity, we believe that God's presence of love and goodness is everywhere, and that life is meant to be good. You can find out more about Unity and our teachings at unityhouston.org.